This is a CBS 12 News special report. Hate Rising, 7 October. Sponsored by Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, Palm Beach Center to Combat Anti-Semitism and Hatred.
In the early hours of the morning of October 7, 2023, the world watched in horror as Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israeli civilians. Terrorists crossing the border from Gaza in a brutal wave that left more than 1,000 Israelis dead. Hundreds more were raped, maimed, or taken hostage before the Israeli military regained control of the area. Israel responded with overwhelming force, targeting Hamas positions across Gaza, many of them hidden inside or underneath civilian facilities, like schools, hospitals, and apartment blocks. The conflict quickly escalated into war, but across the globe, a puzzling picture was being painted by some politicians and media. Israel, targeted by a merciless and vicious attack, was portrayed as the aggressor, the villain, as being somehow to blame for the slaughter and rape of innocents committed by terrorists. All of this in spite of the fact that rapists, killers, and kidnappers took video of their crimes and posted it for the world to see.
You've heard of the rape of Israeli women? Horrible atrocities, sexual mutilation? Where the hell are you?
Dr. Louise Fleischman, author and co-founder of the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research, says in those early days following the attack, no one could have predicted where we'd be today.
I expected a very swift military operation. I expected Hamas to collapse. And at one point, I also expected maybe the release of the hostages as well.
The global response to Israel's self-defense included demonstrations across the globe, including the bewildering anti-Semitic protests and marches on college campuses here in the U.S. On aspect, the growing conflict, which was easy to predict, is that it would not be limited to Hamas and Gaza. As Israel focused on rooting out Hamas leadership, weapons caches, and strongholds beneath the Gaza Strip, rockets were falling in northern Israel near the border with Lebanon, a front that has only gotten worse in recent weeks.
That was one of the objectives of Hamas, was precisely to create a multi-front war.
As hostilities spread, the inevitable humanitarian crisis inside Gaza has increased pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire before the goal of eliminating the Hamas threat has been achieved. The U.S. has been trying to broker some kind of deal to secure the release of the hostages and get troops out of Gaza, but those efforts have stalled.
We must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians.
Obviously, the Biden administration, who says that they want a two-state solution, but that two-state solution also has a lot of difficulties. It's not going to happen overnight. It's something that is going to be gradual, right?
Our enemies are your enemies. Our fight is your fight.
What is the reality of a peace deal, if any at all?
I know there is a lot of pressure on the Netanyahu government, pressure that comes from Israelis, by the way, to cut a deal with Hamas at any price. We want the hostages back.
And with the looming U.S. election, shoring up support from Washington has never been more important for Israel's future.
If you are talking about cutting military aid, you are already talking about basically throwing an important ally under the bus. And that is the message that you project to other allies.
Hello, and welcome to this latest roundtable in our exploration of anti-Semitism in America. Hate Rising, the 7th of October. Today, we're exploring all of the issues raised in the report you just watched, from the global impact of the attacks to reaction here in the U.S. and the implications of the upcoming election for the situation on the ground in Israel. Let's introduce our panel of experts joining us today from Palm Beach Center to Combat Anti-Semitism and Hate. This is Executive Director Josephine Gaughan. Great to see you, Joe. Thanks again for being here today. Down there at the end is the founder and director of the Institute for Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. This is Dr. Charles Asher Small. Charles, great to see you again. And we have a new guest joining us from Florida Atlantic University, political science professor and author, Dr. Robert Rabel. Thank all of you again for being here. We've got a lot to discuss. Joe, let's begin with you. I know you've just returned back from Israel. Give us an idea of what things are like there right now. What's the mood like, the general attitude about the fight against Hamas and, of course, the escalating tensions there in the region?
Yes, so I just returned. This is the third time this year I've been since October 7th. It's a country in trauma. It's a country still in shock. This is a country that is dealing with a devastating event, a war, an economic hardship because of that war, because of people being called up to serve, trauma of survivors, traumas of families who have experienced an unimaginable loss, shock at the world's response to it, feeling incredibly alone because of that, the hate and vitriol that has been projected towards Israel as the aggressor when, as they said, they were the victims. You have a society that was in rupture before the war, politically, for various reasons. And the country came together, but it's starting to tear again because of issues of politics and because of the hostages. The hostage issue is fundamental to the core of the society and to the issues that are there. It is as though without resolving that, the society can't move forward.
Dr. Rabel, you're an expert on Lebanon. Specifically talk to us about the recent escalation of the conflict in northern Israel and, of course, Israeli intelligence's destruction of Hezbollah's electronic communication network, an astonishing development. But where would you expect things to go from here?
Hamas took the initiative and attacked Israel because they felt that Israeli society is kind of split. They have a lot of problems, and they expected the others to be on board. So what happened, after October 7, on October 8, indeed, Hezbollah launched attack on Israel, and their view is that, we are going to support Hamas until Israel stops what they term the aggression against Hamas. And I don't think this is happening. Why? Because they say it's supported front. It's not a supported front. It's a front that has been going on for 11 months. And exactly what Joe has said, you have many people in Israel has been displaced, and also you have many people in Lebanon has been displaced. And there is something to speak about the Lebanese society. Lebanese society, many in Lebanon, they think that, listen, the war is with Hezbollah, not with the rest of the Lebanese. So now what's happening next? What's happening, I think that, Israel indeed has penetrated the security apparatus of Hezbollah. They were able to eliminate a good number of their leader and their religious leader. They were able to destroy a good number of their platform, launchpad. They were able to destroy 40 to 50% of their arsenal. And I feel myself now that Israel is not going to stop because they think really it is a threat. They not only need to allow the return of the internally displaced in Israel, but also to stop the threat of Hezbollah today and tomorrow. So it's not only about now.
Let's talk about Hamas, Charles. It's been a year of intense fighting. Has Israel achieved its goal? Is Hamas being destroyed?
I think the damage that has been done to Hamas is catastrophic. I think there's some people who argue that they're still standing and they're not completely destroyed. I think they've been dealt a massive blow, and there's remnants of some leaders around and some movement around, but I think the infrastructure of Hamas has been dealt a deadly blow. But what's interesting, and I think happened on October the 8th, is the support that Hamas and the Iranian Revolutionary Regime and even Hezbollah has received in some of our best universities in the United States, and this has been taught in our best classrooms for many decades with the funding from Qatar and other Muslim Brotherhood associated movements. SJP, the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, was singing the praises of Hamas, an anti-democratic, genocidal, anti-Semitic, sexist, homophobic, anti-American movement. And in a way, the masks are off because now Hamas and Iran are actually on Telegram and on X and Twitter supporting SJP, and SJP is supporting them. So the masks are off, and these connections, these ideological and political connections which sort of transcend the world, are now being exposed, which is also very important because this is not just a problem for Israel. This is really an attack on democratic values and even the United States.
When we come back, we're going to bring the focus back home to the U.S., where the conflict continues to play out in Congress and on campuses and in our courts.
You're watching Hate Rising, 7 October, a CBS 12 News special report.
Charles, I'd like to begin this segment with a question about money and resources. And we do know that Iran is the primary source of funding for Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. But a lawsuit has now been filed in Virginia under the Anti-Terrorism Act against two organizations you're familiar with, American Muslims for Palestine and Students for Justice in Palestine, groups that your research has shown provide material support to terrorist groups like Hamas. Can a lawsuit like that, even with the support of 22 state attorneys general, including Florida, make a real difference?
I think it's a very important development in Virginia, and also the federal government, actually through the Ways and Means Committee, have also now filed to try to remove the IRS status of nonprofit organizations like SJP and Westpac and other radical organizations that have been funding the students on our campuses, funding the anti-Semitism, funding the intimidation, the physical intimidation of students and faculty and staff at some of our best universities. So I think it's very important for the government to take a strong stand against support of terror and support of violence on our campuses. And I think it's also important to realize that Iran clearly supports Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, a sort of ring of fire around trying to eliminate the only democratic country in the region, but also their neighbor to the west, Qatar, which has good relations with the United States, is basically the funder of this terror. They fund Hamas, they fund the Muslim Brotherhood around the world, and they're funding SJP, the American Muslims for Palestine, and other organizations come out of the Muslim Brotherhood, which the Qatari regime has a spiritual oath. They adhere to all the ideologies, the fatwas, the rulings and religious edicts of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they are funding our universities at the tune of, we found, close to $100 billion coming to higher education in this country from Qatar, which represents the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar is a country of less than 350,000 citizens, and they're giving more money to our higher education than any country on the planet. And this is a threat to our democratic society and even our stability and safety on our streets, because this regime is funding this violence on our streets and in our campus.
Is there any doubt in your mind that that money comes with strings attached?
Absolutely. It's the use of soft power. Why would a country of 350,000 people give so much money to our best universities? In one case at Texas A&M, there was an agreement of $1.3 billion that Texas A&M received from Qatar. In exchange for the money, Texas A&M gave all of the intellectual property rights for 502 research projects. We flagged, of the 502 research projects, 58 projects have dual use for military purposes, 13 for nuclear research. This is Qatar with good relations to its neighbor of Iran. Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon as we speak, and these relations are a strategic threat to the region and to our country.
And Professor Rappel, this is the world you live in. Our last roundtable, by the way, was focused on anti-Semitism on campus. We had a relatively quiet summer when it comes to anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli activity on college campuses. But here we go. We have students back on campus now, and we're seeing some of these issues pop up again. And some universities have seemingly forgotten the lessons that were learned just last spring. As an educator and scholar, what's your perspective on this? Is this just going to be normalized behavior?
It's going to take time to normalize. And this is why, as a matter of fact, Charles' program is very important. What Joe is doing is very important, to bring more education, to bring more awareness to those students who already have been, shaped their opinion, based on false information, false views. So I don't think it's going to be normalized, but what I think you are going to have a decrease. You are not going to see today what you saw at the beginning of the fighting. So it's going to be decreased, but it's going to stay with us. It's going to take some time, and we need a lot of effort to educate and educate and educate.
So you
and I think those two are doing a good job.
Yeah, and so you find that the students are not just, it's not ignorance. This is really for them the propaganda that they're seeing out there in the social media world and online.
It's propaganda, but also it's the literature, you know, and the professors. You go to Colombia and others, as a matter of fact, immediately, whatever happened, it's Israel. Whatever happened, it's Israel. And I speak as someone who lived on both sides of the fence, you know, whether in Lebanon, whether in Israel, whether in many places. And I know that what's happening is wrong. And it's wrong also for peacemaking, not only for democracy, but also for peacemaking.
Contemporary anti-Semitism is not a parochial problem for Jewish people or for the state of Israel. This is a problem that affects democratic values. And we know the funding of our education, our higher education, by anti-democratic, anti-American forces. They know that the most sensitive institution in our society is higher education, because this is where young leaders, young professors, young captains of industry, journalists learn. You influence this, you can transform the society. And we also have to remember our enemies here, of radical political Islam, not Islam, but radical political Islam, Iran, Qatar, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Hutus, they focus on Israel and the Jews, but as Robert will attest, they despise and murder gay people. They subjugate women. Women in Afghanistan, a few weeks ago, it was deemed illegal for a woman to speak in public. Where are all the progressive professors of gender studies and feminist studies, and where's SJP? Women cannot speak on the streets, they cannot go to school.
The assault on women on October 7th, the rapes, the mutilation, you know, were so horrifying. And yet it's been not only denied, but women's groups have been nowhere. So you have #MeToo environment in a world which says we believe women, except when it comes to Jews. Yeah. Women's groups demanding evidence of rape, not believing women. So there's something profoundly wrong here when any sort of values of so-called NGOs and human rights groups have a standard that says for everybody else, but not for Israel, not for the Jews. And I want to emphasize that, because the whole issue of women and what happened to them has been completely forgotten, completely whitewashed, and it's actually obscene.
When we come back, we're going to be discussing with our panel just how the results of our upcoming election might impact the course of the conflict.
You're watching Hate Rising, 7 October, a CBS 12 News special report.
The world must not flinch from the horrors of October 7th. Any country would have the right and responsibility to ensure that such an attack can never happen again. Thousands of armed Hamas terrorists invaded a sovereign state, slaughtering and massacring more than 1,200 people, including 46 Americans, in their homes and at a music festival. Despicable acts of sexual violence, 250 innocents taken hostage. I've met with the families of those hostages. I've grieved with them. They're going through hell.
President Joe Biden there speaking to the UN recently. This is a loaded question, but one I think you'll all agree needs to be discussed. Joe Biden figuratively is done, and we are now weeks away from electing his replacement. Looking through the lens of the ongoing war in Israel, it seems fair to say that whichever side wins will take a slightly different approach to the conflict. And Dr. Rabel, you published extensively about the geopolitics involved. What are your thoughts on how the next administration will impact this critical moment for Israel and the region?
I think myself, we are going to have a strong degree of continuity, because both administrations, they are going to support Israel. Probably you will have certain, differences in details, but I think both they are going to support Israel. And not only that, I think you have a consensus, really, that supporting Israel is to the benefit of United States. And you have a consensus also, whether, in the Harris camp or the Trump camp, is that Hamas has to be eliminated or reduced to a level you can coexist with. And both, I think myself, they are going to push for some kind of peace. I believe myself that Hamas has to be out of the equation, but also you need some new blood among the Palestinian, especially the leadership, because the Palestinians themselves, they are not happy, or a good number of them are not happy with the leadership thus far.
Charles, go ahead.
So I think what's essential is that the United States has to project strong power. It has to back all of its allies. And when the United States is seen as weak, the enemies of democracy, the enemies of the West, the enemies of Israel go on the offensive. And I think what's also interesting, just before October the 7th, the Saudis were on the verge of having a peace deal with Israel. And that would have transformed the entire region. That would have been really an incredible step forward for not only normalization of and integration of Israel into the region, but I think the economic cooperation, the scientific cooperation, I think the whole Middle East really would have blossomed. And Iran was being pushed into a corner, and that's why they attacked to end the possibilities of peace between the Sunni countries and Israel. I think now that Israel seems to be reestablishing its deterrence and they're becoming strong, I think if Israel projects strength, if the United States projects strength, that will enable the Saudis and other moderate people in the region to unite and to create a peaceful environment where economies, science, technology, education can flourish. And I think that has to be, regardless of who wins in November, we need a strong United States.
Joe, weigh in on this. You speak to individuals all over the country, around the nation. This is the central political issue facing not just the nation, but the world for some people. Is that what you're finding? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this is a moment in time for the Jewish people like none other since the Holocaust. This is profound impact, profound consequences. How people vote, some it's a singular issue, some it's not. When you talk about who will possibly lead this nation, what I would say is, obviously I'm not going to talk which person is better on this or not. I want to reiterate what Charles said, which is Israel is America's strongest ally. Israel is the buffer between the Islamic extremism that wants to literally take over Western civilization and America. They are on the front lines. And there needs to be a recognition we are at this moment of inflection. You know, whoever is leading this country understands the consequences and what is at stake.
Natan Sharansky, who's a famous human rights activist and the chair of ISGAP, he always says that people on the left have to fight anti-Semitism on the left, and people on the right have to fight it on the right. And so far, I think there needs to be much more introspection in both parties, and to sort of make sure that within both parties, that they're not engaging in any forms of discrimination or hateful rhetoric.
We want to close by thanking each of you for sharing your perspective with us. Founder and Executive Director of the Institute for Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, Dr. Charles Asher Small. Thank you as always, Charles. And from Florida Atlantic University political science professor and author, Dr. Robert Rabil. And of course, to my left here is Executive Director for the Palm Beach Center to Combat Anti-Semitism and Hatred, Josephine Gahn. Great to have all of you today. By the way, the unedited version of Hate Rising, the 7th of October, right now will be on CBS 12's YouTube page. And there's a link on our website as well at CBS12.com. For now, on behalf of our panel and for all of us here at CBS 12 News, thank you so much for watching.
This has been a CBS 12 News special presentation, Hate Rising, 7 October, sponsored by Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, Palm Beach Center to Combat Anti-Semitism and Hatred.